roll.
Devin signing in. Ford just signed in. Thank you. Belvedere,
Here.
Benicia, Concord,
Here.
Contra Costa County, Corte Madera, Danville,
Here.
El Cerrito,
Here.
Fairfax,
Here.
Fairfield,
Here.
Lafayette,
Here.
Larkspur,
Here.
County of Marin, Martinez,
Here.
Moraga,
Here.
Napa, Novato,
Here.
Oakley,
Here.
Pinole.
Here.
Thank you. I knew you signed in. Pittsburgh, Pleasant Hill,
Here.
Richmond,
Here.
Ross,
Here.
San Anselmo,
Here.
San Pablo, San Rafael, San Ramon,
Here. San Rafael.
San Ramon here.
Thank you, Director Perkins. Okay, San Rafael, I see you. Thank you. Sausalito,
Here.
Solano County,
Here.
Tiburon,
Here.
Vallejo, excuse me, Vallejo, Walnut Creek,
Here.
quorum established.
And Darlene Benicia is here.
Thank you.
Corte Madera is here also.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item number 2, board announcements. Any board members have announcements? I don't see any hands. You, Darlene?
I see no raised hands, Chair.
Okay. I just want to say that unfortunately I couldn't do the whole thing, but I attended the beginning of the holiday party, and I want to congratulate the MCE social chairman or chairperson for planning and putting on a great holiday party. It was a lot of fun. So good work.
Thank you.
Any other board announcements?
I'll just echo that. It was very fun. The part that I could come to was great. So thank you.
Glad that you guys enjoyed yourselves.
Okay, next item is public open time. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any item that is not on the agenda or an item that's on the consent calendar. Do we have any members of the public here?
Yes, we have Howdy Gowdy.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Howdy Gowdy. I live in El Cerrito, and I just wanted to comment on the CPUC's net metering, net billing proposed decision. I think as board members of MCE and also just as constituents of your various communities, you should be very concerned about this very poorly designed proposed decision. I think the motivation to improve equity is good, and that should happen. You know, net metering is too generous. There should not be a credit for retail transmission and distribution charges, for instance. But the fixed charge, or what they're calling the participation, the grid participation charge, is a really poor mechanism, and it really ends up being a disincentive to rooftop solar. And it really goes against the idea that we're not supposed to pay more for saving energy. So when you have an efficiency program and you buy a more efficient appliance, your rates aren't supposed to, go up because you're using less energy. And that's essentially what would be happening here, is by reducing your load on the grid by installing solar and self-consuming that solar power, you would actually be paying a fee for that. And that's not how things are supposed to work. Basically, if you calculate it out, that the $8 per installed kilowatt, minus the transition fee, brings it to 6 something. It comes out to be 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So for what your solar system can produce, you're paying 5 cents per kilowatt hour, and you only apparently have the opportunity to earn something close to 5 cents for exporting that power, which would mean that you're giving away the solar power you export for free. But what's worse, if you self-consume, if you use that solar power on your own property, it never touches the grid, you're paying for that because you don't get the 5 cents for exporting it, but you do pay the 5 cents for that participation fee. So it's really not a fair share type charge. It's a charge on energy that's never touching the grid, which is not a sensible situation. So I really think we need to work on a better outcome that is equitable and fair for all concerned. For instance, it doesn't make sense that commercial customers are staying on the traditional net metering, but residential customers aren't. If it's an unfair billing situation for residential, then it's unfair for commercial too. So let's treat everyone the same. And yeah, there's just a lot of problems with it, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public speakers?
I see no raised hands, Chair.
Okay, we'll move on to item 4, report from the Chief Executive Officer.
Great, thank you, Chair. I've got a few items this evening, and first and foremost, I'd like to welcome Scott Honinson, who is our alternate board member representing the city of Fairfield. So welcome, Scott. Thanks for being with us this evening. It's great to have you. Next, I wanted to, yeah, hi. Next, I wanted to talk for a minute about the MCE 2021 impact report that y'all got a sneak peek at this impact report last month, but it is included in your packet this evening, and I just wanted to encourage you to share it with your constituents and colleagues. And as we close out the year, I wanted to highlight some of our key accomplishments. Many of these are in the impact report, but there are a few that I just wanted to make sure I read out loud so that y'all could feel the kind of the pride of what we've accomplished this year. A lot of exciting stuff. So a couple of the highlights are that we delivered more than 90% carbon-free energy to over 1 million people and businesses this year. We gave out over $4 million in energy efficiency rebates, and we launched a flex market program to shift load away from the evening hours when the sun goes down and there's demand on the grid. And this flex market program is now being replicated by the CPUC across the state. So that's really exciting. We've installed over 1,000 EV charging ports in our communities, and we achieved an A credit rating due to strong financial management. And on the equity front, our MCE Cares credit program has helped 30,000 customers so far, and we were successful in making sure that MCE customers could take full advantage of the arrearage management program, which is a state program. And our customers have already been able to eliminate more than $1 million in energy debt by participating in this program. And MCE has been so successful in letting customers know about this program that we're seeing participation rates more than double what we're seeing in any other CCA community. So I think our outreach is working, and we're seeing a lot of folks take advantage of this savings program. We also distributed free energy saving kits to almost 800 families, free smart thermostats to over 200 families, and we helped over 100 families get weatherization upgrades. Pretty much every day of the week, we have crews. MCE has crews out in the field conducting audits and retrofits to help our customers save energy. So we've been busy, and there's a lot of results to show for it this year. We also dedicated $3 million to workforce development activities, connecting folks with green jobs. And we launched a new solar discount rate that gives income qualified folks 100% renewable energy with a 20% bill discount. And last but not least, we added community benefits as a new part of our power supply bid requirements, raising the bar for suppliers to support equity and bolster our communities. And to put all this work in perspective, just I've got a cumulative number for you. Since 2010, we've committed over $2 billion to get new California renewable energy projects built, creating hundreds of good paying jobs and meeting the state's SB 100 carbon reduction targets 13 years early. So that's a lot to be proud of. And I want to thank each of you for being part of the dedicated, innovative team that MCE aspires to be every day. We're really grateful for all of your leadership and your commitment to our success. So now sort of turning it to what we're thinking about for next year, I wanted to let you all know that our policy team has been coordinating with our new federal lobbyist to identify federal and state funding opportunities that are a good fit for MCE's goals and program priorities. We're especially interested in opportunities to bring renewable energy, energy efficiency, and storage to underserved communities and help emerging technologies that could provide resource adequacy or reliability resources. These opportunities will be a big focus of our work in the coming year. And then a couple of logistics, just to keep on your radar. As a reminder, MCE will have an administrative shutdown between December 26th and 31st. And we will not be holding our regular executive or technical committee meetings the first week of January. So you'll see cancellation notices coming out for those. But there will be a virtual special executive committee meeting on Friday, January 21st. So it's a little later in the month. That meeting is going to be at 12 noon. If you're on the executive committee, you probably got an invitation for that today. And we look forward to seeing some of you there. And then lastly, because of the recent fluctuations in COVID cases and CDC guidance, we've pushed our in-person office reopening from January 4th to January 18th. And we'll be reassessing any new guidance from the CDC in early January to determine if additional delays are warranted. And we'll keep you posted. And that's it for my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Dawn? Okay, I don't see any.
Just
Oh, there you go.
there you go. Real quick.
Yeah, Director Karoff, go ahead.
It's not a question, but a comment on Don's report. Listening to your summary of the accomplishments, and I know we can read this in the materials, but hearing it is just really wonderful to hear, and makes me very proud personally to be a part of this organization, even though my own role is modest at best. So thank you for that report, and thanks to the rest of the board for its contributions, and mostly thanks to staff for making everything work.
Okay, any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, I don't see any. Next item is item 5, the consent calendar. Does anybody want to remove anything from the consent calendar? Apparently not. Are there any, well, we've already done public comment on the consent calendar. So is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll move the consent calendar. C1
I'll
through
second.
C5.
Second. Motion by Perkins, second by Bursan. Okay, call the roll, please, Madam Clerk.
Belvedere,
Yes.
Benicia,
Yes.
Concord,
Yes.
Contra Costa County, Corte Madera,
Yes.
Danville,
Yes.
El Cerrito,
Yes.
Fairfield,
Aye.
Fairfax,
Yes.
Lafayette,
Yes.
Larkspur,
Yes.
County of Marin, Martinez,
Yes.
Moraga,
Yes.
County of Napa, Novato,
Yes.
Oakley,
Yes.
Pinole,
Aye.
Pittsburgh, Pleasant Hill,
Yes.
Richmond,
Yes.
Ross,
Aye.
San Anselmo,
Yes.
San Pablo, San Rafael,
Yes.
San Ramon,
Yes.
Sausalito,
Yes.
Solano County,
Yes.
Tiburon,
Yes.
Vallejo.
Yes, and I'm here as well.
Thank you, Katie. Walnut Creek,
Yes.
motion carries.
And the next item, the high point of our meeting tonight is item 6, presentation of the Climate Action Leadership Award.
Yeah, and we are going to have this award introduced by Director Vasquez, who is representing the County of Solano on the MCE board. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Director Vasquez.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to do this. You know, MCA created this community, this Climate Action Leadership Award in 2000 as a way to celebrate policymakers and advocates who have made significant contributions to California's effort to combat climate change through clean energy. Last year was our first inaugural Climate Action Leadership Award, and that went to Senator McGuire. This year, I have the honor and the privilege of making this presentation to the 2021 Climate Action Leadership Award to Assemblywoman Cecilia Aguilar Curry. Cecilia represents all of Napa County and parts of Solano. She was on the Winter City Council when I first met her some 20 years ago, and was the first female mayor elected to her hometown of Winters. She's been a strong advocate for rural communities and has been engaged in energy issues for a long time. She's been a strong advocate for biomass as a way to put agricultural waste to good use, to reduce the results of catastrophic fires through sustainable forest management. Cecilia has remained true to her nature. She brought broadband to the city of Winters, working with still the president of California Emerging Technology, Sonny Wright McPeak. That was about 10 years ago, if not 11 or 12. But Cecilia also authored AB 843, which was co-sponsored by MCE. And it allowed the CCAs to access funds to help support biomass electricity and to make it more affordable for our customers. Cecilia also worked when she was the mayor of Winters to bring PG&E's training facility, which amounted to about $75 million worth of project itself. She's always had that can do and will do attitude. Again, I'm very proud to make this announcement and to recognize a good friend of mine and a strong advocate for all of us. Cecilia has always been that way, no matter where she's been. Anyway, is she on today? Or can I say other things about her?
I think we're going to have a recorded acceptance speech. I don't think she was able to make it at this exact moment. So I think we're going to have the recorded speech played, but you're welcome to finish up with anything.
No,
else
that's
you'd
good.
like to-
I'll meet with her later.
Very good. Thank you so much. And yeah, so we're going to hear from her now, I think, on the recording.
Well, thank you so much for this great acknowledgement for the leadership for the MCE. I want to just say is that it's all about partnership and how we work hard together. And I know we have a lot more work to do. But I was honored to be able to sponsor and to take on AB 843. We got it over the finish line, got the governor to sign it, and gives us much more access to funding. We'll continue to work on other projects together. And again, thank you for your great work as well and the leadership that we're all doing together. Thank you.
Okay, are there any comments from other board members on this? How about public speakers? Do we have any public speakers?
I see no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's great. It's nice to have friends in high places. We'll move on to item 7, Assembly Bill 361. It's the resolution to continue meeting virtually. Does somebody, is there a staff report? Somebody want to introduce this?
Yeah, we're going to hear from Catalina Murphy from our legal team.
Good evening, everyone. So there are 2 proposals for your consideration in the AB 361 materials in your packet. The first is Resolution 2021-11, which would allow MCE to continue to hold its meetings via teleconference for the next 30 days. Given the recent mask mandate in California and the prevalence of the new COVID variant, staff recommends approving this resolution so that the MCE board meeting and committee meetings can be continued to be held via teleconference for the next 30 days. The second ask is proposed resolution 2021-12, which would give the authority to the technical committee to also make the certain findings under AB 361 to continue teleconference meetings in the event the board or the executive committee can't convene to make that finding. So staff recommends that the board approve both of these resolutions, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from board members? This is getting pretty routine, isn't it? Unfortunately. Are there any public speakers on this issue?
I see no raised hands, Chair.
Okay, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, who was the motion by?
Holly Thier.
Okay, motion by Thier, second by Quinto. Let's call the roll, please, Madam Clerk.
Belvedere,
Yes.
Benicia,
Yes.
Concord,
Yes.
Contra Costa County, Corte Madera,
Yes.
Danville,
Yes.
El Cerrito,
Yes.
Fairfax,
Yes.
Fairfield,
Aye.
Yes.
Lafayette, Larkspur,
Yes.
County of Marin, Martinez,
Yes.
Moraga,
Yes.
Napa, Novato,
Yes.
Oakley,
Yes.
Pinole,
Aye.
Pittsburgh, Pleasant Hill,
Yes.
Richmond,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
San Anselmo,
Yes.
San Pablo, San Rafael,
Aye.
San Ramon,
Yes.
Sausalito,
Yes.
County of Solano,
Yes.
Tiburon,
Yes.
Vallejo,
Yes.
Walnut Creek.
Yes.
Motion carries.
The next item is item 8, MCE rate adjustments.
Yeah, and we are going to hear from Garth Salisbury on this item, along with Justin Kudo and John DeLessie. So I'll turn it over to you all, and I think we have a slide deck coming up as well.
Good evening, everyone. So many of you heard a fair amount about this proposed rate adjustment the last board meeting. in November. And so we're going to go through again, update a little bit. One of the things that we certainly have been following is all the adjustments and changes that have been occurring by PG&E and the CPUC. So really, you're going to hear a lot of things that are the same, but we want to do is update you tonight on a few of these changes, and particularly with regards to some of the timing we expect from PG&E and their rate adjustments. The next slide. So quickly, we'll go through an executive summary. We'll talk again about revenue expectations for MCE given increased costs. We'll go through a preliminary rate change proposal, and then we'll get some feedback from the board. So increasing energy and resource adequacy costs have dramatically reduced MCE's projected net revenue for this year and the future years. So PG&E is also experiencing these increases, and they have filed for an increase in their rates, and they should significantly decrease the PCIA as well. Originally thought this was going to happen in January, but now given some additional filings, and in particular, on December 6th, some ratepayer advocates filed a joint protest to PG&E's proposed rate changes. This will likely delay them for a number of months into 2022. So far, the Ad Hoc Rate Setting Committee and Executive Committee staff and others recommend to implement a phased rate increase starting in January 2022. Next slide. So briefly on our rate design principles, first and foremost, we must produce revenue sufficiency. Our rates must cover our program expenses and debt service requirements, if any, and add to our reserves. We want our rates to be competitive. We want relative stability. We want our customers to understand the rates, and we want equity as well between different rate classes, and we want efficiency. We want the rates to encourage conservation. Next slide. So let's talk briefly about revenue expectations. Next slide. So MCE's change in net position for fiscal 21-22, the current fiscal year, is now forecast at about break even, or plus or minus about $1 million. This is down from the budgeted amount of $29 million. And the key drivers are increases to resource adequacy costs and power supply costs. These increased costs are expected to continue into the future years. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to John Gillespie to talk a little bit about some of these cost increases we're seeing in the energy markets.
Hey, Garth, this is Evelyn. I do not see John logged in.
Oh, okay. Okay, I will step in for John here. So, I think you've probably been following this on your own. Really, what we're seeing here is sort of not only in California, it's nationwide, and it's sort of worldwide, with soaring costs for energy, particularly natural gas, and through these supply crunches, we're seeing increased costs affect MCE as well. Even though we purchasing primarily renewable energy, the cost of gas and its effect on the energy markets generally do affect our prices, particularly as we hedge our future costs. Next slide. In addition, we've, of course, due to the drought, seen a significant reduction in the availability of hydro capacity. This hydro capacity, when we don't have that, oftentimes we use natural gas to make up the difference. So those increased costs are being reflected as well. Next slide. Now, MCE does a really good job and is very careful about hedging our forward purchases, and we're generally very well hedged as we go into particularly the summer. But as those hedges roll off, we have to put new hedges on for the future. And what we've seen is very, very distinct increases in these costs. And in particular, we've also seen increases in resource adequacy prices. Next slide. This graph is a really direct depiction of that, continually increasing costs for MCE for resource adequacy, and we anticipate these costs will continue to grow into the future. Just as in 2019, MCE was paying about $20 million for resource adequacy, and next year we expect it to be somewhere around 70 million. Next slide. So these increased costs have had a pretty dramatic effect on MCE's net revenues. In last fiscal year, our net revenues based upon our budget were about 15 million below what we expected. This year, as mentioned, we expected to produce net revenues around 29 million. And now it's we anticipate sort of break even without some sort of rate action. In the next few years as well, very little margins expected, and then turning negative, certainly by the 23-24 fiscal year. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justin Kudo to talk about MCE's proposed rate adjustment.
Thank you very much, Garth. Next slide, please. So let's quickly revisit how MCE and PG&E's generation costs have compared over the last several years. MCE last increased its rates in mid-2019 to reflect rising energy costs. At this point, MCE remained a little bit less expensive than PG&E, and it capped off a 3-year period where costs with MCE were at parity or better than PG&E when compared to PG&E's costs, excuse me. So starting in 2020, you had 3 consecutive and significant increases to the PCIA, and this caused MCE to be more expensive since this mid-2020 period. These rate changes were driven by forecasts of energy prices, which turn out to have been inaccurate because, as we know, energy prices increased significantly over the course of this year. As a result, the current 2021 rates charge PG&E customers too little on generation rates and charge MCE customers too much in the form of PCIA. So that all leads to the corrected rates which PG&E provided in its November forecast, which show a reduction in the PCIA of about 70%, while their own generation rates are forecast to increase by over 30%. So this means that MCE should be able to stay very competitive with PG&E in 2022, even with making the necessary increases to cover higher power supply costs. Next slide. So based on that, your board reviewed a proposal to increase rates by at least 0.3 cents and up to 2 cents per kilowatt hour, and that within that range, staff would achieve a 2% discount relative to PG&E's generation rates. This ensured that at a minimum, MCE would increase its revenues enough to cover higher power supply costs, and that at a maximum, it could recover shortfalls in net position while passing on the remaining savings to customers. Next slide. Since that meeting, we've had quite a few updates on PG&E rates, as Garth mentioned. Various arguments have been introduced to try to soften the degree of the rate increase to PG&E's customers, and we don't generally expect them to result in any significant changes to the forecast that PG&E provided. However, these delays are pushing back the approval of PG&E's new rates and mean that in all likelihood that they won't be implemented until March 1st of 2022. There is a smaller chance that they could go into effect as early as February or after March if additional arguments are considered. But we are really tracking for March 1st at this point. Staff now recommends implementing only the minimum 0.3 cents increase on January 1st, as these are necessary revenues for the current fiscal year. And that would be an increase of about $1.60 per year for the typical household, or excuse me, $1.60 per month for the typical household. To minimize customer impacts, though, and to keep bills stable, staff is recommending that the remaining 1.7 cents of the increase, as well as rate reallocation, be delayed until the PCIA reductions go into effect, which should hopefully be in March. The PCIA reductions are expected to be over 2 cents per kilowatt hour, so those reductions would completely offset MCE's rate increase. Based on the best numbers available, customers should actually then see their bills go down a little bit when these rate changes go into effect. Not to mention that they would be significantly below PG&E's new and much higher generation rates. Next slide. So here we see some small updates to the figures which were provided to the board last month on how final 2022 rates are forecast to compare with today's rates. Currently, MC is about 2 cents per kilowatt hour more expensive than PG&E, which is about $11 per month for the typical household. We continue to look at many different scenarios for PG&E rates, but under all of them, we expect MC to not only be less expensive, but to provide a significant savings compared to PG&E rates. Next slide. And here is the updated forecast of how the typical household bill might compare. So under this scenario, MC would save a household almost $20 per month. Some scenarios have this as a little bit less than 20, but still a significant savings compared to the PG&E rates. Next slide. So based on the updated staff recommendation to increase rates by 0.3% in January, and the further 1.7 cents when PG&E's ERA goes into effect, expected in March, this is what a typical household might see in 2022. On January 1st, PG&E's T&D costs are going to go up by about $11 per month. MC's costs would also go up by about $1.60 a month. Or to put it differently, MC's rate changes on January 1st would be increasing the total electric bill cost to customers by about 1%. On March 1st, we then forecast that PG&E's generation and PCIA changes will go into effect. Our illustrative household that we have here would see an increase in MCE charges of $9, but they'd be offset by a reduction to the PCIA of almost $18. So you'd have a net rate reduction there. Meanwhile, the comparable PG&E household would be facing a very large increase to their generation rates, forecast to be about $20 to $22 per month. So ultimately, you have a modest increase to customer bills in 2022 for MC customers, particularly when compared to PG&E bills, which are forecast to increase by about 20%. With that, I'll turn it over to Zay Perrin, our Manager of Customer Operations, who will talk about various new bill relief programs in effect for our customers.
Thank you, Justin. So here we have a depiction for the bill relief for not only our vulnerable customers, but all of our customers, depending on what different program it is. So as Dawn had alluded to earlier, MCE Cares Credit has afforded now just over $1.8 million of savings to just over 38,000 customers. Our forecasted total savings come March of 2022 will be a savings of $3.1 million. For the arrearage management plan, we have secured forgiveness for our customers at a total of $2.7 million as of the end of this month. And the forecasted total for March is $3.3 million. And one of the keys that I wanted to point out with the arrearage management plan and also the California arrearage payment plan that I'm about to talk on, these numbers are just the MCE portions. So both the AMP program and the CAP program are full bill savings programs, which means that the PG&E side of our customers' bills will also get the same benefit. So when we look at the $3.3 million of forecasted savings for arrearage management, we're actually looking at a total bill savings for our customers of almost $10 million. And for the California arrearage payment plan, we have secured $6.3 million to pay down the equivalency of 45% of all eligible active residential customer arrearages from the COVID timeframe. Next slide, please. So this slide gives an illustrative depiction of the numbers that I had just gone through. It shows both the CARES credit now and in March, the arrearage management program, abbreviated as AMP, for both now and in March. And then we also have an AMP eligible portion to this. So we have our AMP customers that are active in the program right now, but we do have a potential of $6.9 million as of today for customers that are eligible in AMP, but not yet enrolled. And then once again, our cap at $6.3 million. Next slide. This slide shows our total funding through March 2022. The first column that you see is our total arrearage as of today for our residential customers. So just over $12.3 million in arrearages. The total amount of arrearage funding that we're going to receive in March, so that's accumulation of both AMP and CAP, is just over $9.9 million. We'll still have an eligible amount of AMP funding at $5.9 million. And through that time period, we will have saved our customers and our most vulnerable customers just over $3 million, $3.1 million. And now I'll hand it back to Justin.
Thank you very much. So Garth, did you want to take the slide or do you want me to take it?
Yes, thanks, Justin. I'll talk about this. So we do want to share with the board sort of a range of possible outcomes regarding, more about when these proposed rate adjustments will be implemented. As we said, we are asking for for board approval for a 0.3 cent increase on January 1. And this will be really important to sort of ensure that we cover all our costs during this period. Zay just mentioned these arrearage programs, and we do hope and expect to get those. When we're actually going to see that, is still, I think, up for a little bit of debate. So particularly some of the federal programs. So we don't know if we'll see those in this current fiscal year. So we hope to, but we're not sure. So we sort of the highlighted or the light color highlight here sort of is showing sort of the lower end of the outcomes of the rate increases. And so we hope with this 0.3 cent increase, we'll get the current fiscal year to be positive on a pure revenue basis and net MC somewhere around $4 million. On the other end of the spectrum, where we were to see the full additional 1.7 cents for all of the fiscal year, the next fiscal year, we're projecting currently that would produce about $115 million to MCE. So again, that's for the next fiscal year. Next slide, please. So in response to some questions we've received from certain board members, we do want to talk a little bit about this range of possible outcomes. Certainly, as we were indicating in some earlier slides, MCE has undercollected in the last couple of years, really to the tune of about $40 million. And unlike PG&E, given their regulated status, when PG&E undercollects, they can recoup it from customers in an ensuing year. It's not really the case with MCE. If we don't collect in the year in which we're billing, we don't have a mechanism to go back and collect under collections, just to our regular rate. So in this case, in some respects, given the changes to the PCIA and those reductions, even with this increase, our customers are really not going to see much of a net increase to their bills. We are, in some respects, trying to capture some of those deferred revenues from prior years. Another thing that we're attempting to do with this is to maintain reaching our target, our liquidity target. Our board approved reserve policy sets our liquidity target for the next fiscal year at about $343 million. Our current position is about $250 million, and that includes our credit line. So we currently have a shortfall to meet that target by about $93 million. So again, during these periods of high PCIA, we sort of undercollect given what our customers are paying, and we must balance that, with our ability to collect revenue and be cost competitive. Next slide. Some other considerations I want to make sure that we're thinking about. If we're able to produce some significant revenue in a given year, that allows us to defer some into our operating reserve fund, which again is a revenue deferral. We have done that in the past, small amounts really, but we'd like to do more into the operating reserve fund because it would allow us to get through a really difficult year like we've had this year, and potentially even not increase rates when a really difficult year and when we're not cost competitive, because we can draw on this operating reserve fund to stabilize rates. And that's really the idea, is that we wouldn't potentially have to increase rates or even maintain rates if PG&E's rate adjustments in the next year are pretty dramatic as well, going the other way. Also, want to talk about the implementation of the rate increase. I mean, we were now thinking, at first thinking it was not going to happen until sometime maybe in the late spring, early summer even, but now it looks like it might happen in March, but it might not. And any time that we aren't able to have the full 1.7 cents additional rate increase, that's about $10 million a month. So these are just some considerations when we think about under collections in prior years, our opportunity to shore things up next year, given our rate competitiveness, and our ability to put some money into the operating reserve fund. Next slide. So the recommendation is to direct staff to increase system average rates on January 1 by 0.3 of a kilowatt, 0.3 of a cent. And then direct staff to implement additional increases to system average rates of up to 1.7 cents to achieve a minimum 2% discount relative to PG&E's rates. And then following their implementation of the 2022 Energy Resource Recovery Account and/or associated reductions and changes to the PCIA. Thank you. So we are available to take questions, comments.
Questions or comments from board members? Director Fong.
Thank you. Again, this is from pure ignorance, so and just lack of knowledge. But first, regarding the 40 million and under collected, and what I heard from you, Garth, is that we don't have a process in place today to recoup the 40 million. And it sounds like, and maybe it's just me, that as a result of not having a process in place, our customers, our good customers, are being asked to offset that uncollectible or under collectible of 40 million. And on a go forward basis, it doesn't sound like we plan to have a process in place to address under collect. Am I correct in my perspective?
Well, I mean, we don't have a mechanism, as do the regulated utilities, to be able to undercollect in a given year and then add that to rate base in the next year. We set our rates to cover our costs, and we try to remain as best we can competitive with PG&E bundled rate customers, so that our customers don't opt out. And that's really what's happened in this last year. We have effectively we have absorbed these increased costs such that we don't anticipate MC really to produce much net revenue this year. We haven't raised rates, again, because as Justin indicated, in 2021, MCE customers were paying more than PG&E bundled customers because of the PCIA. So we didn't raise rates then. We effectively, if you want to think of it, we ate that differential. And so now we have an opportunity, given the reduction in the PCIA, to, in some respects, kind of make up some of that lost revenue from the current fiscal year.
And I guess looking at it prospectively, and again, I don't know what PG&E does with undercollect, but is there an opportunity for us to build a process to mitigate the undercollect so that we don't find ourselves in a similar position next year with our good customers and needing to ask for an increase from them to make up for this difference?
Well, we don't have an actual mechanism to do that. But one thing we can do, and what we've done in some respects to replace that, is the operating reserve fund, where we defer revenue in years where we may have we have decent revenue into that operating reserve fund. So it's not so much we're delaying collecting revenue. What we're doing is collecting revenue and then think about it as almost delaying spending it. So we're doing it prospectively as opposed to in arrears.
Sure. You're not recognizing that revenue day one. You're reserving it until you need it, so to speak, and then you'll recognize the revenue.
Right.
Okay. I guess I'm just, again, I don't know enough about your business to really understand undercollect, but it would seem to me that, our good customers are having to make up for this undercollect. There's got to be a way to kind of check and balance that, kind of a delta.
If I might jump in on that, I think that just to clarify, we are not in an under collection situation this year. We're just barely breaking even. And we anticipated to have a lot more revenue at the beginning of the year based on our projections. But the cost of power has been going up all throughout the year. And so we're at a situation here at the end of looking at the end of our fiscal year where we're going to be very close to zero accruing to reserves. So we're not looking for customers next year to cover costs that our customers should have borne last year. Really, we're just looking to make more progress towards our reserve targets in a year when there's more headroom to do that.
Gotcha. The second question I have is, what is the impact on your operating expenses with what you're currently forecasting, which is a deficit, but obviously you're going to, hopefully there's going to be some adjustments to it, but what's the impact on your operation with what's been going on with your revenue projections?
Yeah, I'll let you answer that, Garth, but I do just want to clarify that we're not looking at a deficit. We're looking at about a break even result at the end of the year. We're not looking at a deficit. But I think what Garth was clarifying towards the end of the presentation there was that our liquidity target in our reserve policy hasn't yet been met. And that's happened in the past, and then when that happens, we try to make it the next year. And so that's part of the proposal this evening.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Director Darling.
And this is another question that might be coming a bit from ignorance, but if PG&E's rates are not getting reset until March, does that mean the PCIA after that March change in rates should be even smaller? I mean, does it even out over time, or do we just lose it for this period, the first 3 months?
That's a really good question, and it's a really complicated answer, Director Darling. So I don't know, Justin, do you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. The answer is it should not be any smaller because any over or under collection is contained within the calendar year. What would, however, happen is if the PCIA is set too high in the first 3 months of this year, then that would be an over collection, which would be balanced out in 2023. So if if January and February, really, which is what we're expecting right now, have a much higher PCIA rate, that should be input into the calculation for the balancing account in 2023 and would be a negative pull on the 2023 PCIA.
So from a customer perspective, it all comes out in the wash at some point, roughly.
Right. Yeah. All of these balancing accounts that's what they work to do. To a question that Director Fong had earlier about how PG&E handles that, when PG&E has a shortfall of revenue or an under collection of revenue, that gets added to the revenue requirement in the next year as well. So any over or under gets passed forward into the next year.
Okay, and then the other question I had was, with Fairfield coming in, does this make any messaging, does the idea that we're only going to do a small increase now and a bigger one later, does that affect the messaging as they're trying to talk to their customers, or are we, how's the timing work there?
I think that's something we've discussed a lot. I think the good news is that customers in Fairfield are really going to see a benefit to MC enrollment, really in any of the rate situations that we're looking at. What is most likely to happen at this point is that their enrollment would coincide with PG&E's generation rate change. So PG&E's generation rates are supposed to go up about $20 a month in March. Meanwhile, for Fairfield customers, if they have an enrollment in March, then they would avoid that rate change, that rate increase effectively. So they've benefited from rates that were PG&E rates that were probably a little bit too low this year, and they would be benefiting from MCE rates that are better in 2022. Now, where this does get a little bit complicated, and it's something that Public Affairs is working very hard on, is whether PG&E's rate change is potentially delayed beyond March 1st. And that's something we're working on. But we do think that overall, we're going to be of significant benefit to customer bills in Fairfield. Zay, did you want to add anything to that?
I think you stated it very well, and we are being careful with that messaging, but it does look by forecasts that these changes would happen just in front of the Fairfield enrollment, which will happen in April.
Director Brisson.
Yes. Are there any other marketing possible impacts which we are working on other than Fairfield that would be impacted now or in March?
Say, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so we wouldn't have any other marketing impacts or enrollment impacts other than Fairfield and then our move-ins, but that'd be a positive for them as well.
All right, now the PCI gets really complicated, and I have this thing of vintage, whatever. How does that? Are we better off with people registering early at our lower rate, in terms of the legacy when the whole thing flips out? How is that? I'm trying to wrap my head around that vintage component and how it plays into here.
So under most of these scenarios, the earlier vintages have a little bit lower rate temporarily projected for 2022. As we get further removed from the enrollment year, all the PCI rates tend to even out a lot more. So the PCI would be slightly higher in Fairfield, but would still provide significant savings compared to PG&E based on the forecast that we're seeing.
Do the people in Fairfield understand this?
I look to Zay on that, but we will absolutely make sure that our communications are very clear on what their bill expectations should be.
Hey, if I come in, yes, I'm taking notes on this. I'm an alternate tonight, but this is all news to me, so I'll do the best I can to get all those questions answered.
Okay.
Yes, and we have communicated with Fairfield. Our last communication was based off of the information that we had received about PG&E with the expectation of a January increase. And so this is new information as well, but we'll continue those conversations. And we'll have our open engagement webinars and communications with the community starting next year. So we'll have even more information to hopefully provide a clearer message and really better timelines than what we have today.
The the last part that I wanted to throw out is we're going into a year where the word inflation is become quite the table topic at dinner. Now we're scheduling ourselves to have a rate increase January and then another one in March. In terms of that conversation and the word inflation, we seem to be playing into it. Are we fairly comfortable that if we're going to do this, are we doing it enough? Should we anticipate that maybe raised a little bit more in January and try to stay ahead of the game? What is the feeling? Because I think we got kind of caught in terms of the increase in our energy costs. How scary is it going forward for next year?
Well, I think I can answer that a little bit, Director Brisson. I mean, we certainly could see higher costs than we're currently projecting. I think, given the rapid increase in costs, we are, in our projections, we're trying to be conservative. In other words, assume that costs in some respects are going to continue to increase. And so, it certainly may be that next year our energy costs and RA costs are higher than we have projected. That's certainly true. Certainly possible, I should say. And so I think we're pretty comfortable with this, with these proposed rate increases. I think it also speaks to a little bit about some of the the proposed margin that we might see, and also it is certainly significant compared to the last few years. But again, what we hope to do, if our costs are higher, we'll still, MC will still be doing okay in terms of net revenue, if they are higher and even significantly higher. And we will be able to put additional amounts to reserves. So again, I think we're pretty comfortable with the projections as they are. And again, if it's not enough and we start to see these margins beginning to contract again, we'll come back to the board for something for next year. We certainly think for the next fiscal year, 22-23, that this proposed rate increase is enough.
Okay, is it both enough and is it, I don't want to, there's an old expression, you don't want to leave any money on the table. And even though I know we're a nonprofit, I'm kind of used to asking that question. To put it bluntly, can we get away with a little higher? Give us more time in the long run.
Director Brisson, that's a really great financial question against the risk as well. We are really trying to balance what we are seeing and what we can do. I think the risk levels that we are proposing here that we're working with through our budget is a balanced approach, because there are quite a bit of uncertainty for next year as to what PG&E may end up doing next. So I really sincerely appreciate your question on the risk side, but I think this is a really well-balanced approach for only for next fiscal year. It is not something we can guarantee that it will be there for the several fiscal years. But for the next one, I think it's a balanced approach.
Okay, so we're comfortable on that side. All right, I just have to ask the questions, that's all.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know we have a couple of other questions, but I just want to tag on that really that is the crux of the policy decision that your board gets to make tonight. The recommendation that we're making will put us in a reasonable, comfortable financial position that aligns with our current policy and reserve targets. But certainly your board may decide that it makes sense to go for a higher cap than the 2 cent maximum. And we can certainly do that. It appears there will be more headroom. But as Garth and Vicken were saying, we, from a business perspective, the recommendation should align with our needs as an agency for the next year. And we can always revisit mid-year as we see how things are going.
Director Wilkinson.
Garth, I just wanted to make sure that I understand fully how the recommended rate increase ties in with the reserve policy. So from what I can see from your presentation, you said you're about 93 million short on the liquidity target, and your what I think constitutes the 23% increase in generation rates leads to about 120 million in cumulative increase in net income, which I assume goes directly toward that liquidity target, or will go directly towards liquidity. So you're creating an excess of about 25 to 30 million versus what the board has designated as the policy liquidity target. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand how that all fits together.
Yeah. Well, as I think I mentioned, I suspect if we're able to actually generate, it's 115 million. If we're able to generate 115 million next fiscal year, we quite surely would come back to the board to defer some of that revenue into the future, to the future years. And the real reason for that is the kind of dramatic shift we've seen from PG&E for the rate adjustments for 2022. It's very, very possible that they overcollect in 2022 and then come back, and we call it sort of the whipsaw effect, and come back and dramatically reduce rates and increase the PCIA in the next year. So again, this is that delayed effect of their rate making, and delayed effect when they see increased costs affecting their their regulated net margins and profit margins. So I would say that we hope and expect to be able to produce that kind of net revenue, and we also would expect to put a very large chunk of that into the operating reserve and defer that.
So my understanding was that it looks less likely that PG&E is going to be able to make such a dramatic rate increase than was initially proposed. So it doesn't sound like they're going to have the same flip-flop in the following year to the same degree. But it sounds like what you're saying is that you're actively looking to fund your operating reserve. It's not just that you're funding your reserve according to the policy that the board set. You're now looking to actually actively fund an operating reserve. Is that correct?
Well, I would say that if we were able to produce that amount of net revenue, that it would be very likely that we would come back to the board, because it's also a board-approved action, to defer some of that revenue into an operating reserve for future years. Our operating reserve target is our target is way beyond what we have in there currently. So in addition to this, the pure reserve targets, we have the operating reserve target as well. So this would be a good opportunity to make a considerable progress on that as well.
And what is the operating reserve target? I didn't know there was a ceiling on that.
Oh yeah, I believe it's. I actually, off the top of my head, I don't have that number, but I think it's about somewhere around 20% or so. I'd have to go back and check, Director Wilkinson.
Okay, because I think the thing that for me, I'm always bearing in mind is this question of equity, and is it fair to be charging so much to today's customers, charging and creating a lot of excess revenue today to protect future customers, which might not actually be the same customers as we have today. So you're overcharging today's customers in order, I understand, to create stability for the business. And that to me makes a lot of sense. It just feels like it's a very dramatic rate increase, taking advantage of the PCIA reduction. in sort of a very aggressive way to create a very strong revenue outlook for this fiscal year beyond what the reserve policy seems to suggest, as I understand it. So
And
I
if I can
I
jump
guess that's where I
in,
stand.
yeah, I just pulled up the operating reserve fund policy, and the targeted balance at this time is 10% of the total operating and non-operating revenues in the current fiscal year. So if you would look at the total budget for the year, we would be targeting 10% of that.
All right, so that's about $60 million, and there's $15 million in there.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So okay, that all makes sense. Again, it's just you're grabbing a lot in 1 year, and I understand that the circumstances are such that you can do that in this 1 year, but it is an aggressive rate increase. And somebody mentioned inflation, and the idea that you follow inflation up the hill to me just creates hyperinflation, and that's not what we need as a country. So I agree that we should, I think we should be as moderate as we can be whilst maintaining the financial stability of the agency. Bearing in mind, as I always say, that our shareholder is our ratepayer. That's the fundamental thing for me.
Yeah, Director Wilkinson, I want to actually agree with you that just answering Director Berzan's question, we did work very hard to have a really balanced approach and not be going after the maximum, which could have been easily double the amount that we are seeking, if not more. So we are definitely doing that. And we are committing to a 2% margin to be below PG&E. Please understand that could end up being a risky proposal from our side, because it's really unstable the way things are going at this time. And we as we have done usually all the time, we will come back to the board as needed when we end up learning more, especially by the time we do the budget process, to bring proposal as to what is it that we want to fund into the days of cash on hand and the operating reserves with our proposals. But I think we're really trying very hard to not to hog anything and to provide a balanced approach.
Okay, thank you.
Director Zorn.
Thank you. I appreciate all of Director Wilkinson's questions earlier. Those were some of the concerns that I had been having as well. I know a lot of the questions that have come up so far have involved our balance sheets, but I was hoping I could ask a few questions from the ratepayers' perspective. And I actually have my bill in front of me. Can I share my screen and ask some very specific questions about how a ratepayer might see these changes show up on their bill next year?
You can. One thing I would encourage you to do, though, is make sure that your account number is not shown in anything that you're displaying.
Let's see.
Okay, Director Lawrence Galati.
Sorry, I'm playing with my phone trying to get it on. So thank you so much. And that was actually, thank you, Director. That was actually very informative with your bill. So thank you so much for sharing that. My question, I think I heard that you have about $6 million that you're going to distribute with people from low-income communities that they are not current customers. So I hope I heard correctly. My question is, how are you going to reach out to those communities?
So the 6.3 million that's followed under the California Arrearage Management Plan is actually for all communities. It's not just our vulnerable communities. So that $6.3 million is going to go to all eligible arrearages for the COVID timeframe, that is March of 2019 through June of 2021. So all customers that had eligible arrearage amounts in that time period will be receiving forgiveness for that in February. So, and it will be on an equal equity basis. So basically, all customers, as it was originally allotted, it came out to 45% of the total amount. And because it came to 45% of the total amount, every customer would get 45% reduction in their total arrearage that they had. So if I had $10,000, then I would get a reduction or forgiveness of $4,500 to my $10,000 that I had for that time period. If my neighbor had $5,000, they would get 45% of that reduced. Now that those numbers can change in total dollars as customers paid down over the course of this time. When we get to February, we'll rerun the numbers and look and see what the total eligible arrearage dollars for that time period are. And if anyone paid it down, then the percentage that would be allocated to everyone that is in the program would then change, and it would go a little bit higher.
And that percentage has already been approved, right?
Correct. These are federal funds, and they're being executed by the state of California.
But I mean, like the percentage of the funds, the 40% that you're describing, that we don't have anything to say around that percentage, because I'm thinking, what I'm hearing from you is that we are giving the funds equally to all customers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really for equity, right? Because it's more equality. So I was just curious to see, is there a chance to reevaluate and say, you know what, the low-income communities are going to get a higher percentage? Is that?
No, there's not, because this program was not set only for vulnerable customers. It was set for COVID relief. In comparison, we have the arrearage management program, which is set for our vulnerable customers, and only our vulnerable customers are eligible. And that's the $3 million of additional funding that we had discussed and that we had presented. So, and that's not on a percentage basis, it's on a total basis.
Right, and that was set up by the federal government, not by MCE?
The arrearage management program is by the state, so it gets paid out by public purpose funds. The California arrearage management program is actually a federal funded program, and it's executed by the state. So those are federal funded dollars.
I mean, I'm glad that they are bringing funding, but I feel that they should be looking at equity and not just equality if they really want to help people, you know. But anyway, thank you so much. That was my question.
Okay, and anyone else? I don't see any hands up. If I don't see you, just speak out. Yeah, somebody have.
Member of the public, if
Okay.
we're done with the board.
Okay, are there members of the public who'd like to speak on this item?
Howdy.
Yes, my name is Howdy Gowdy. I live in El Cerrito. So I had a comment on something I didn't see mentioned, and I'm not 100% sure it's part of this rate setting, but that would be the net surplus compensation rate, which is what is paid out by MCE for solar customers with net kilowatt hour generation. And about a year ago, it went from being a time of use based retail rate to a fixed net surplus compensation rate. And I was just wondering if that rate is changing or if that's even set by this or a different process. But more than whether it's changing or not, I'm also wanting to comment that I think it was a loss to have it go from a time of use based credit to a fixed one, because the price that MCE is paying for off peak net generation has gone up and it's gone down for peak generation. So I think we just need to have that nuance of time of use to get the best outcomes and values out of things. And so I would just encourage that in future rate settings that net surplus compensation would be a time of generation based value. But I'm also curious if it's even part of this rate setting and whether that rate would change. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's not part of this current rate setting process. That rate is determined by the average price of electricity during solar generation hours over a 12-month period. So that's used to determine what the market rate for that power is, and then the MCE net surplus compensation payments are set to twice that rate. So it is determined based on the actual value of electricity during solar production hours, but with a premium on top of it.
Any other comments from members of the public?
I see no raised hands, Chair.
Okay, I think we're ready for a motion.
I'll make a motion. I would direct staff to increase system average rates on January 1st, 2022 by 0.003 per kilowatt hour, and also to direct staff to implement an additional increase to system average rates of up to 0.017 kilowatt per kilowatt hour while achieving a minimum 2% discount relative to PG&E rates following the implementation of PG&E's 2022 Energy Resource Recovery Account and/or associated changes to the PCIA. Barbara Kohler, Fairfax.
Okay, is there a second?
Denise Athos, I'll second it.
If I could make a clarifying comment, I'm so sorry to interject, but I wanted to clarify that the recommendation listed in your slide deck is slightly different from the one in the staff report. And if it pleases Director Kohler, we would recommend going with the one in the staff report. There's just a slight clarification there that is saying that there could be, let's see, we've added an S to implement additional rate increases after the PCIA and the Energy Resource Recovery Account is completed. Basically, we've added an S there in case there needs to be two rate increases because it's possible that the PCIA may be the PCIA reduction may be approved separate from PG&E's generation rate increase. It's possible they'll happen together. It's possible they'll happen separate. So we wanted to add that S in there.
I would accept that S in there and so moved.
Thank you.
Okay, Denise,
I agree. I agree as well.
Okay, before we take a vote, I just want to thank our staff for doing such an in-depth job of this. This is something we've been talking about for several months now, and it's been to all the subcommittees, and it's tricky business, but I think they've done a good job in finding, based on their best estimates, finding the right path forward. So let's do a roll call vote, please.
Belvedere.
I'm sorry, I should have asked a question before. Is this will we come back one final time, or is this the final vote?
This is the final vote. Yeah, we did the preliminary last month.
A reluctant yes.
Benicia.
Yes.
Concord.
Yes.
Contra Costa County. Corte Madera.
Yes.
Danville.
Yes.
El Cerrito.
Yes.
Fairfax.
Yes.
Fairfield.
Aye.
Lafayette.
Yes.
Larkspur.
Yes.
County of Marin. Martinez.
No.
Moraga.
Yes.
Napa. Novato.
Yes.
Oakley.
Yes.
Pinole.
Yes.
Pittsburgh. Pleasant Hill, Richmond,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
San Anselmo,
Yes.
San Pablo, San Rafael,
Yes.
San Ramon,
Yes.
Sausalito,
Yes.
Solano County,
Yes.
Tiburon,
Yes.
Vallejo,
Yes.
Walnut Creek.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. That was our last action item for the evening. Our next item is item 9, MCE bonding, a discussion item.
We're going to have a report out from Garth.
Oh, thank you. I think we wanted to turn this over to Director Haroff to do his report out.
Thank
Right.
you. Of course. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Don.
You're muted.
Not anymore. Thanks, Don and Garth. We've been working on this also for quite a long time, and I'm happy to be here this evening to report out on the work of the Ad Hoc Bonding Committee over the last number of months. The Ad Hoc Bonding Committee met with MCE staff and outside consultants 5 times since the first meeting we had in August 2020. The committee was formed primarily to obtain outside guidance on the potential for MCE issuing tax-exempt or taxable bonds to finance an ownership interest in a physical asset, such as a renewable energy or storage facility, or an administrative office and support facility for MCE's ongoing operations. It should be emphasized that MCE has no specific projects of that sort planned at this time, but the organization's financial strength and strong investment grade ratings would allow MCE to access the public bond markets at potentially attractive interest rates. Pursuant to board action in 2020, MCE retained K&L Gates as bond counsel and Montague DeRose as the financial advisory firm through an open process. At that point, staff and these advisors began working on creating a debt management policy for MCE, which is required by state law. The committee's staff and consultants had extensive conversations about what this policy should look like and the issues that needed to be addressed in the policy. We now have a comprehensive draft to bring back to the full board for consideration sometime early next year. The next step in our discussions was to develop a draft bond indenture. The bond indenture is essentially a contract between MCE and bondholders in order to secure the bonds. Working with our bond counsel and financial advisor, we now have a draft of a bond indenture. We would also like to bring that back to the full board for consideration again early next year. Finally, just to emphasize, while we can finalize and adopt the debt management policy, MCE won't formally adopt a final bond indenture until it is ready to actually issue bonds. However, with all the work that we've put into this process over the last almost 2 years, we've made a strong start in the process to take that action when the appropriate opportunity arises. So that concludes my report on behalf of the committee to date. And I think at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Garth, who can provide some additional details on the process and possible next steps.
Thank you, Director Haroff. We can go to the next slide. And as Director Haroff said, we were just talking about all the increased costs we're seeing from project cost, resource adequacy, and so on. And we started this endeavor really to have an option for MCE to be able to potentially go a different route and to potentially buy an ownership interest, a part or all of an asset. Because as we sign power purchase contracts and so on, there's profit built in there, there's taxes, there's equity costs and so on. So we have an opportunity potentially to be able to actually purchase that same project at a lower cost than we would otherwise be able to do it through a power purchase agreement. So that's really the basis for this, and why we spent this time. And but it takes a very long time to be able to get into the capital markets and issue debt. So we wanted to take these first critical steps, creating a policy, a debt policy, getting a bond indenture ready, so that if an opportunity presents itself, we'd be able to act and act pretty quickly. So we've done that. We've taken the first few critical steps, and now we're probably 40 to 60 days away, if we actually saw a project, to be able to issue debt. Next slide. So it's already been discussed. Just going to go through very quickly this draft debt management policy, our form of bond indenture. And again, these will be brought back to the full board sometime early next year. Next slide. This is a timeline, very probably difficult to see on your screens, but where we are right now is kind of just before that blue line, maybe just one sort of notch over, where we would bring the debt policy back to the full board and the indenture next year. And now we're just, if we identify a project, we are just those few months away from being actually able to issue debt and purchase it. Next slide. The debt policy. The policy really is a guidelines for issuing debt, the types, the relationship of debt to our capital program, our policy goals, internal procedures, and so on. Next slide. And it will help future boards to help with decision-making, establishes basic parameters around when you should issue debt and can issue debt, and capital needs and so on. So it really is a planning tool and guidepost for being an entity that actually owns projects and issues bonds. Next slide. We can go again to the next slide. I think it's important that the policy very clearly states that all debt must be board approved, and it governs the debt issued directly by MCE. This is not about our participation in JPAs. It's direct MCE debt. And as a policy, we can update this over time as our needs would warrant. Next slide. And we can go for the next slide as well. Moving on to the bond indenture. The bond indenture is this legal document that establishes the terms under which MCE may borrow money in the future. And we must have an indenture to issue debt. The finance team and our consultants have drafted, we have a draft of a master bond indenture, again, which this would apply to all of our future debt issued under this indenture. And we'll bring that again to the full board early next year. Next slide. And one more slide. We just want to take a second. Some of the important things in this bond indenture are covenants. These covenants will direct and really determine what MCE does in some respects with regards to our rates, for example. So there'll be a rate covenant in this indenture, very important, which requires that MCE set rates to cover our cost and to be able to pay the debt service on those bonds. Next slide. Another is an additional bonds test, which basically says, hey, if you're going to issue more debt, MCE, you must meet these tests so that you're able to pay the debt service on those bonds, and not overly stressing the operation such that you have to continually increase rates to be able to cover the debt service. Next slide. So that's really it. Kind of a quick overview and summary of the debt management policy and the master bond indenture draft. We will, again, not issue debt until we've actually identified a project that we feel it makes financial sense to have an ownership interest in. And of course, we'd come back to the board before we did that. Okay. And that's it for the update on the bonding initiative.
Okay, this is not an action item. It's a discussion item. Anybody have questions? Director Murphy?
Hi, yes, good evening. First of all, I just want to thank staff for the presentation and also thank the directors who are part of the bonding ad hoc committee. While I wasn't a part of it, I realized that there probably was a lot of work done tonight and over the last few months. So just wanted to appreciate you all's work. I really have a simple question. I appreciate the slides and the conversation, but I do want to really ground us and what this means. So my question is very simple. I'm having a tough time and am very challenged in explaining this to my constituents here in Pinole. What is the impact of this work? What's at stake? And why is this important? I know there's a lot more that could be explained, but if we could just simplify this a little bit more, Girth, or anyone else from staff, that would be very, very helpful to me.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. The idea with potentially owning a project or an ownership interest in a project is that we can do so at reduced cost. Because again, as we discussed on the whole rate discussion, we have to pass on the costs of our energy and renewable energy and resource adequacy to our customers, and we must cover that cost. So if we're able to appropriate that cost, if we can, that energy, we can do that in a way that's cheaper by owning the project. That's something we will consider and look at and evaluate. So that's really the basis behind getting ready to potentially borrow money. I mean, MCE now has developed strong credit ratings. It would allow us to borrow money in the capital markets at a very attractive rate. We have reserves to be able to do that. So that's really the reason that we would pursue it. Again, we haven't made the decision to actually issue debt, but that's the reason, because we would do so because it would reduce our costs.
Are you still there, Director Murphy?
I am, thank you. Yeah, and I just wanted to know if there were anything that we can tell also some of our constituents as well in regards to why this was necessary to do now as opposed to last year or next year, or I mean, was there timeliness around this? I know our board agreed to this. Again, it would be great to kind of get that recap.
If I could make a comment, Garth, just from a historical perspective, I'd like to point out that before MCE even formed, this was one of the things that was really envisioned by a lot of the grassroots folks in our community that were promoting MCE as a thing that could really be successful. And the kind of the idea was that as a public agency, we would be able to borrow at a lower rate than a private monopoly utility. And so it was thought that that would be one of the key advantages of forming a community choice program and allowing us to compete with a monopoly utility and put more revenue, the savings that we could achieve by issuing bonds could be used to put more money towards renewable energy and get more renewables into our mix. We've been able to do that, obviously, but we have not yet used the issuing of bonds. And one of the main reasons why is that when we launched, the ITC tax credit was a big factor in large power purchase agreements, large solar facilities and other renewable facilities being built. And only private companies were able to take advantage of that ITC tax credit. And so in doing the financial analysis, it was determined that it was actually more beneficial to take advantage of those ITC tax credits and allow the private entities to build and own the projects for the initial years until those ITC tax credits were pulled off. But it was expected that after that time, which is typically between 6 and 10 years, that would be a good time for the projects to be turned over to MCE or a public agency. And so we gave ourselves a window of time to start working towards being ready to issue bonds, with the thinking that we might want to take over some of these projects once the ITC tax credits have been rolled off. And we do have purchase rights for some of our power purchase agreements currently. So that's kind of just the historical thinking about this. It's been kind of on the side burner as we've been working on a lot of other things that were more pressing, but this has always been a part of the vision, and it's exciting that we're making a lot of incremental steps to be in a position to do it if it pencils out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that additional information. And it's just really helpful to hear those type of perspectives, especially to talk about this locally. So I really appreciate that additional information. And again, to the staff, MC staff, thank you so much for your preparation and the hard work I know that's gone into this. And it's, again, great to be a part of it, and certainly great to be an ambassador to the work we're continuing to do.
Director Darling.
I just had a question. We've just started with the prepaid bonds that use that arbitrage between what we can do with tax exempt versus taxable bonds. Is there a greater cost savings if we do this, purchase a project this way rather than just use that arbitrage to buy a contract? Or is it just having a variety of tools in our portfolio that we can use?
It's a really good question, and as Dawn said, what we are doing so far is signing power purchase contracts. Okay, and because of the tax incentives afforded private developers, that made the most sense. Okay, and I want to certainly make the distinction between the prepayment transaction, which is one way that we can also use tax exemption to reduce the cost of that same PPA. That's allowable. What's not allowable is for us to go, while the developer is utilizing those tax incentives, the federal tax incentives, for us to go in and also finance that with tax exempt debt directly. But we can do a prepay of that and then get additional savings on top of what was the best deal at the time we signed that contract. Our own bonds are different for different reasons. Where we could go in and buy that same project after these tax incentives are gone. We could buy the project directly, or we could buy the building at in San Rafael, for example. So it's a different, yet another approach and potential use of the tax exemption. In each case, trying to find the lowest cost route to the end. So whether it's a building, whether it's a project, whether it's an RA project. So again, they're different tools.
Okay, and then the other question is, I know with the water agencies I've dealt with, we've been able to tap into the state's iBank and skip some of the difficulty in issuing bonds. Is a CCA eligible to use the iBank?
They're not. I mean, the federal Title 7 monies. No, we're not able to use the water bank, or again, it's just for drinking water and for wastewater.
I thought that's the state revolving fund, but I thought there was a separate iBank for cities that are buying clean energy. And I'm way out on the edge of my knowledge right now.
Director, I am not familiar with the infrastructure bank and whether or not MCE could use it, but it's certainly something we'll look into. If there's advantages to do that.
Yeah, it's just another tool that people have used that would be interesting to see if it works.
Yeah. Director Haroff.
Yes, and this time I think I've unmuted myself, so I'm getting better at that. I just wanted to respond very briefly to the question or comment a few minutes ago about the timing. Why now? Why not years ago, or why not sometime in the future? And having been involved in this process now for, I think, the duration, one of the things in my mind that really made this a real opportunity was MCE's success in achieving a level of financial stability overall that resulted in some very, very nice credit ratings from the credit ratings institutions that are out there. And I don't know that we really would have had the incentive to go out there and try to take advantage of those ratings when we didn't have them. So they've become available to MCE relatively recently in the life of the organization. And this just seemed like a great opportunity to take advantage of the recognition that the market has shown to MCE for its success in creating a level of financial stability that is quite remarkable.
Okay, any other questions or comments by board members? Director Wilkinson?
Super quick question. How do the rating agencies feel about MCE taking on debt versus their current structure? Are they just agnostic, or have they expressed any kind of opinion?
Director Wilkinson, they have expressed an opinion in that, you know, they're going to look at very closely if MCE were to actually issue debt, particularly if it was a significant amount of debt. So they will look at that. They'll look at us a little bit differently. And, you know, it will be our job to prove to them that actually issuing debt is a cheaper alternative than signing another power, for example, power purchase agreement. So we'll do that analysis and show them that, yeah, this makes a lot more sense for us financially, or we get operational benefits as well if we may have an ownership interest. So, you know, they absolutely will look at it and they will evaluate it on that basis. So, you know, we have talked to them about it. And in fact, our rating now is it's called it's just an issuer credit rating, but it is not a rating on any bonds that we would issue. So they would actually do another evaluation actually on the bonds based in large part on that indenture and the covenants in it.
But have they expressed any concerns within the existing rating about how the possible issuance of debt might affect that overall rating for the agency?
And depending upon which rating agency it is, they put positives and, you know, or what could change the rating. And so they have positives and they have, you know, potential negative effects on the rating. And so I think in just about any rating, they'll indicate that, you know, an overissuance of debt would put pressure on the rating, a downward pressure on the rating. So again, we don't have debt yet. So, you know, they generally will always look very closely at the amount of debt you have vis-a-vis your revenues, in particular net revenues.
Sure, but what it sounds like what we're saying is that they're agnostic. They haven't expressed a specific concern about this, so they're just agnostic.
Yes, I guess that's true, because again, there's no CCA that has issued bonds. So, you know, they don't really have, you know, many metrics to look at, but I mean, they effectively, yes, I guess you could say they're agnostic.
Okay, all right, thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Are there any comments from members of the public?
I see no raised hands, Chair.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to almost our last item. Item 10, report on successful completion of renewable energy prepayment transaction.
All right, and we're back to Garth again.
Yes, thank you, Don. Okay, we'll try to get through this very quickly. I mean, it is very much a good news and kind of happy report. So we completed our first renewable energy transaction. We issued it through the California Community Choice Financing Authority. It was a $602 million financing. It will save ratepayers about $2.6 million a year for the next 6 years, which is the first reset period. It hit the target of 10.3% savings on a number of power purchase agreements that we put into the prepay. And we'll talk briefly about the California Community Choice Financing Authority that was created just to do these prepayments. And that process of assigning these renewable PPAs to the prepaid supplier. Next slide. So the key elements, we assigned 4 PPAs into the prepayment. All of the terms of the PPA remain the same. It's renewable energy. We get the renewable attributes. Importantly, the debt associated with the program is issued through the conduit and is non-recourse to MCE. So it's not our debt. It doesn't show up on our balance sheet. However, the debt is recourse to the prepaid supplier, Goldman Sachs. If it terminates early for any reason, the PPAs come back to us, and it's just as if we never did the transaction. Next slide. So we have talked to the board before about California Community Chance Financing Authority. It's a JPA. This was really driven by MCE to create this JPA to be by CCAs for CCAs. It's made up of MCE, East Bay Community Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and Central Coast. And we each have a representative on the board. These are the 4 founding members. Any other CCA can join and issue prepayment bonds through the entity. The current scope of CCCFA is just limited to issuing prepayment bonds. So as I said, it keeps the bonds off our balance sheet. And actually it improves savings too, because some of the other conduit issuers that we would have used charge a tremendous amount of money to use the conduit. And this is truly a not-for-profit CCA setup just to, CCCFA JPA, just to cover the costs of issuing bonds. And so that's going to save a tremendous amount of money to any CCA that utilizes it over time. Okay, next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay Saxby, who's going to talk a little bit about the 4 PPAs we put into the transaction.
Yeah, thank you, Garth. As Garth has described here, the core tenet of this transaction is really having actual energy to prepay. And of course, as we've discussed at MCE, we buy renewable energy through power purchase agreements. And under those agreements, of course, we have 2 legal counterparties to the PPA. There's the buyer, which is MCE, and the seller, which is usually a limited liability corporation of a solar wind developer. So for the prepaid transaction to work, we actually had to swap out MCE as the buyer and put in the bank that receives the prepayment. Then that bank sells the energy back to us so that we can still count the energy deliveries and green attributes toward our annual targets. And in order to change counterparties from us to the bank, we had to execute what is called a limited assignment agreement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, but we identified 4 large-scale PPAs that had enough cost associated with them to meet the financial targets for this transaction. The projects delivering energy under the prepay transaction range in size from 40 to 105 megawatts. They're all existing solar PPAs from our portfolio that are actively generating electricity. And of course, the end result of that is to reduce the cost of those PPAs. Next slide. So although the bank entity becomes the counterparty to our PPA with the seller under the limited assignment agreement, it is truly a limited assignment, meaning that for all intents and purposes, MCE still manages and administers the contract and works directly with the PPA sellers on project deliveries, any contractual issues that may arise. So all of the terms and conditions of the contract remain unchanged. So there's really no change in our normal course of business because of the assignment. And one last thing I'll mention here is that all of the resources in the program are solar PV, and as you're aware, solar has a variable energy delivery profile based on the time of day, based on the season. And because we actually had to agree to a fixed amount of energy to put into the prepaid transaction, we're only counting a subset of those deliveries in this transaction. So just a really quick example, this is just an illustrative example of the energy volumes that are being accounted for. So imagine that you have a project that's expected to deliver 30,000 megawatt hours of energy in a given month. We're only including, let's say, 60% of that volume in the prepaid transaction so that we don't have any issues meeting the targets that we agreed to because we're dealing with variable resources. Garth, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Next slide. So let's quickly go through some of the outcome. The bonds were offered to investors on November 15th. Again, it was $602 million worth of bonds. The underwriter received 49 orders. They were all institutional orders, so very, very large orders, one as big as 300 million. And so there was only a certain number of bonds available. We had orders for about 2.2 times that. So pure supply and demand. The underwriter was able to reduce the interest rate because of that demand, which made the deal more successful. the total true interest cost on these bonds was 1.59%, and that's a tax exempt rate. Next slide. This is really hard to see, but I just wanted to kind of put it up here. This is the official statement for the transaction, and wanted to, if any member of the board would like to see that, we'll send you a link or a PDF of the actual offering document. So just email Darlene and we'll get one to you. Next slide. So very important, the board passed resolution 2105, which allowed MCE staff to go out and negotiate and execute this transaction, but only if certain parameters were met. And there were three primary parameters. First, that the bond proceeds could not exceed 900 million, and the proceeds from the transaction were just under 690 million. The annual savings on a cash flow basis would not be less than 10%, and we achieved 10.3% savings. So that's about $10.6 million a year. On that $25 million a year, as Lindsay was showing, of the actual prepaid amounts from those four projects, we were saving about $2.6 million a year on $25 million worth of energy cost. And the other one was the total cost of issuance could not exceed 0.8% or less than 1% of the proceeds, and the actual issuance cost was 6.63%, so lower than that parameter. So all of that was met. We closed on November 24th. We were also able to recoup all of our out-of-pocket expenses to put the deal together, and we expect we will roll to reprice the bonds sometime around December of 2027, and then the next roll of the bonds, there has to be a minimum savings of 6%, but hopefully we'll see a lot more than that. Next slide. I'm going to take a quick second to kind of give the board some perspective on how successful this deal was. The green bar you see there is the MCE deal. All the other bars, and there's 28 of them, are the previous 28 or 27 prepayment transactions done in the last 5 years. So our initial term was kind of right around the average at 6 years. The next slide. The total underwriting cost. As you can see in the green bar, the underwriting fee was the lowest of any transaction in the last 5 years. The total cost of issuance, which includes all the other consultants and so that are involved, was also equal to the lowest that have been done in the last 5 years. And next slide. And very importantly, fees. So that you see the green bar there, this is the commodity supplier reservation fee, and just about the lowest of any we've seen in 5 years. And then finally, the total cash flow savings at 10.3%, one of the highest of any deal or transaction done in the last 5 years. So that concludes the update on the prepayment transaction, and I'm willing to take any questions.
Well, that's very exciting. I think you guys deserve a victory lap. So questions from board members. I see Director Wilkinson.
Garth, I just have one really quick question, which was when you talk about the bond rollover after 2027, why is the minimum saving there only 6% rather than the 10% that was targeted for the initial transaction?
That is a tax law requirement, Director Wilkinson, because it's a 30-year transaction. The tax attorneys require that if you're going to do a 30-year transaction, we expect that transaction to remain out there for the full term. So again, because it's going to roll, they require that there be some minimum savings for it to roll. And that we at MC have to accept a minimum savings number. So in other words, we couldn't say, oh, to roll, it has to be 15%. And so we can't be in control of that. So we have to agree to a minimum number. Of course, we expect and hope that at the roll, the savings will be greater than 6%, but that is the minimum that we would have to accept.
So for the remainder of the 30 years after the initial 5-year period, you could just be getting a 6% saving. Is that what you're saying? Just depending on market conditions, obviously.
Yes.
Okay,
That's
that makes sense. And then the only other question I had, and I should have asked earlier, but was Goldman put in competition for this transaction or not?
Oh, no, they weren't at the time. They were not. And I think we discussed that previously, that they were not. At the time this was proposed to us, Goldman was the only firm that actually could do this type of transaction.
Okay, no, because I was just seeing that the other CCAs that did a similar transaction used, I can't remember who, Morgan Stanley, somebody else. And so
right.
I presume if you do more of these transactions, they'll just be put in competition going forward.
Yes, I think that's right. Yes.
Okay, all right, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? Members of the public, any comments from members of the public?
I see no raised hands, Chair.
Okay, that brings us to our last item, board matters and staff matters. Any board members have any final items to bring up? How about staff? I don't see any. Well, in that case, I just want to wish everybody a happy and safe holiday, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you so much.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everybody.